home. What do you think of when you think of home? Where does that take you? You know, the whole journey, the whole main purpose of our life is to take that journey home. The journey that takes us back to source, connection, to remembering who we are. I don't know about you, but I love stories about the journey home, the journeys. Do you love those stories, the strength of the human spirit, how people find the courage and the motivation to do incredible things to find their way back home to life? Don't you love those? It's always, it's the God-bumpy ones that just remind you that we are here to be courageous and powerful. And I think that's what this morning is about for each and every one of us, to claim our power. How many of you feel there might be a lot of darkness in the world today? You know what? The darkness loves to claim power, and many of us like to claim the power of the darkness. But there's only one thing that can put out that darkness, and it's our own. It's at that same point every week. I don't get it. It's for us to claim our own power, because our power, our light, is the one thing that will put out that darkness. But too many of us have gone numb. And this is not a time in the world to be numb, disconnected, out of place. We have to be doing our part. And stories help to remind us, if you think about it, the stories that have lasted through the ages. The story of the great poet Homer, from the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey. One of the greatest stories of all time, the Odyssey. The journey of Odysseus after the Trojan War, trying to fight mysterious mythical creatures and the wrath of the gods to get home to his wife Penelope and his son, who were there trying to stave off the people trying to take over their island and take the throne of Ithaca. And it was this journey, and how they had to fight and be courageous and move forward. They did not distinguish their light. And sometimes we look at the end of stories that end happily and we think, oh, it's just a story. No, that's the way life is. If we can claim the light and be the light, the story ends happily. Odysseus had to go home, and he had to be in a contest to prove who he really was. And then he had to stave off the suitors that were trying to take over and then reclaim the throne. And I claim that for us. It's time for us to truly take over our lives and be the ones. Our whole life is about finding our relationship with God, with Spirit, with the infinite source. It's all an individual journey. No one can do it for us. We can read books, right? We can go to classes, which I love classes. I'm going to talk about classes in a minute because they're just really good. But we can do all that, but the journey is within ourselves. We have to do that journey. Ernest Holmes' favorite story was the story of the prodigal son. Jesus' parable about the younger son who got very enticed by this physical world. It can do that sometimes. And he wanted it in his inheritance, and he wanted it right now. Have you ever felt that? God, give it to me, and give it to me now. Forgetting there's our time and God's time. But the father said, yes, here's your inheritance. And he went to a faraway country, spent all his money in riotous living, having the good life. But then there was a famine. And the only work he could find was feeding the pigs. But there wasn't even enough food for him. And he was at rock bottom. But he never forgot about home. Because that's something that's in us. It's that evolutionary urge for us to find that connection. So he was humbled completely, and he knew he didn't have a right to go home and take his original place in the inheritance, but he thought he would go home and at least he could be a servant and get food to eat. But the minute he went on his journey home, the minute he arrived where his father could see him, his father came out with open arms and went running to him. Because you see, when we turn our heads, which is our job to turn our heads and focus on what's good and right and true and the light, or whatever you want to call it, when we focus on God, believe me, God's always there. God is always God. We get to decide who we want to be. And sometimes our choices are a little interesting. But to get back on track, he was there. The father opened his arms. He gave him a robe and sandals for his feet, said, get out the fatted calf. Let's celebrate. Let's have a party. We know how InSpirit loves to party, so we would love that. Here we are. Party because he came home. But when the older brother, who had been diligently working in the fields, saw that his father was giving a party for his wayward younger brother, he was jealous. And he was angry, and he said, Dad, I've been the one that's been doing all this work for you. And the father said, you will still get your inheritance, but it's time to celebrate. Celebrate your brother who was lost, and now he's found himself. He remembers who he is, and that's the story with us too. When we realize who we are, it's all waiting for us. Spirit life is always there for us, always there for us. We decide how long our journey is going to be. We decide how far we're going to go on this path. It's up to us. Ernest Holmes tells a fable in one of his books, The Philosophy of Ernest Holmes, and he tells a fable about time, eternity, and the timeless. And they got bored. Time, eternity, and the timeless, because there was so much time and nothing to do. They were bored, so they went to see the old man on the mountain who was self-existent and who held the apple of wisdom. And they asked him, here are the whiny ones again, and I'm going to talk about me being whiny in a minute too, so we're all in this together. We can all get pretty good at whiny, but they were whiny. There's nothing for us to do. It's really boring here. What do we do? And the wise old man said, hey, I have an idea. Let's create beings that can entertain us. They'll be very interesting because we'll let them have freedom. They can be happy or not. They can do what they want. But there will be invisible ties, enduring ties that can never be loosened, attached to each one of us. So the old man thought this was a good idea, but then he realized, the only thing I have to create these beings out of is myself. So if they're going to be made in the image and likeness of me, I must hide those qualities deep inside of them, so they'll have to discover them for themselves. That will be a much more interesting journey, right? Right. It will be much more interesting if they have to do that. So that's the fable that Ernest Holmes tells, and that's why we're here, because all of it is inside us right now, and we have to reveal it and let it go. And we think it sounds pretty reasonable. We read the books. Oh, this is the way to do this. We meditate. We connect. It's a journey and a process. We're not going to get to God, to spirit, to love, to compassion, to all that by logic and reason. Albert Einstein said, logic and reason will take you from A to B. The imagination will take you everywhere. Everywhere. We've got to open up. One of the first things in the process of this beautiful discovery is opening up to something more. This week in our self-mastery class, and I love that class, and I love the students, I love where we are. Dr. Roger always says that Sunday service is the appetizer, classes are the main course. That's where we really get to understand what this teaching, what this process is all about. And this week our topic was faith, believing in something greater than we are. Now, there was a poem, or just a little reading from Rumi's Little Book of Life. What would Sunday be without Rumi? The womb is dark. If one were to tell an unborn child that outside the womb there is a glorious world of green fields and lush gardens, big mountains and huge oceans with skies lit by the sun and moon, the unborn wouldn't believe in such absurdity. Still in the dark womb, how could the child imagine such indescribable beauty? How can you imagine that when you're in the darkness? Do you know what I mean? It's hard to think of something when we want to see it with our eyes. I'll believe it when I see it. In the same way, when mystics speak of the world beyond scent and color, the common man, defined by greed and blinded by self-interest, cannot grasp such reality. Well, the question I posed in the class this week was, when was it easier to find faith in a challenge? And when was it more difficult? My answer surprised me. It really did. You know, when Kirk and I lost our 15-year-old daughter in 1992, just all of a sudden, it was so unexplainable, undefinable, that faith was not hard for me to find. Yes, I remember the time I lost faith and sat at my minister's desk crying and just saying, "Where is God? Where is God?" That didn't last long, though, because it was so unexplainable that faith had to be there. Now, it didn't mean the sadness and the sorrow went away, but faith was there. Yet 10 years ago, when we lost our home and our financial security, and in all the downfall of our economic structure, that's harder to understand. Because dang it, we did things right, the best we could, right? Logic and reason. We followed the directions. Yes, we lost some income, but we kept up with things because that's what we were to do to get our refinance. We did it all right. Right? Well, right, wrong. There is no right or wrong, really. I mean, but that's really hard. And, you know, I still carry that, have still been carrying that around as, what do? You know, how do we recover, 10 years later, still worrying? Well, my answer came today, or this week, from an endocrinologist. Not a gynecologist, an endocrinologist. I'll tell you, on this journey of life, guides are always there for us. Always. We never know who they are, what they're going to look like, and most of us miss them most of the time. Right? They're there. If you look at the journey, the hero's journey, I'll tell you, Joseph Campbell says the guides are there. They rush in to help us all the time. It can be books falling off shelves. It can be things that we just step over, but they're there continually all the time to lead us to the light. So I was whiny. I was tired. And my hair was falling out, and something was wrong, and my blood test didn't look good to me, and I was hiding behind, I was going to go in and I was going to stand up for all the things that were wrong, right? Have you ever been there? You want to stand up for everything that's wrong with me. And so I go in, and I'm just waiting, and this wasn't somebody I knew, this was somebody that was recommended to me, and a pretty by-the-books endocrinologist, and so I sit down, I've got my blood test there, and I'm going to tell her what's wrong so she can support it and tell me all the things that are wrong with me, and I have every right to feel tired, not good, and all this stuff, and right? Didn't quite go that way. Didn't quite go that way. She begins by looking things over and listening to me for a while, and then she said, I really don't support that patients hide behind the label of a disease. Okay, well, that's one check off my list. And she said, I see a little imbalance here that can be corrected. Okay. And then she looks at me and she said, I'm going to tell you something. What I see in front of me and on this paper is a vital, healthy, beautiful woman who will work well into her 80s, vibrantly and alive. And then she said, there's a lot of work to be done in this world. That was from my endocrinologist. That I didn't even know. I was like, okay, God, got the picture. Get off it. Get to work, because I'm going to tell you right now, this world needs light, and we are the ones to shine it. Yeah. We are the ones to shine the light. It's no longer any time for us to sit in that darkness and whine and complain about it. It may be easier sometimes, but we're not the ones to do it. We got to start waking people up and doing our part. This week, just watching all the messages about suicide on the planet right now and what's happening with our teenagers. My goodness, we got to get kids off their cell phones and doing something worthwhile. We have to let people know they they matter and make a difference. There's a call for us to do our work. And whether it's your endocrinologist, your gynecologist, your obstetrician, your gardener, I don't care who it is, start listening, because messages are coming to us that there's work to be done. And it helps. It really helps if we start cooperating and consciously using the universal laws of life. What we put out there comes back to us. The law of cause and effect. What we give, we receive. The law of compensation. There is only one, the law of oneness. And there is a law of divine order. That everything in our life right now is part of this plan of our growth to be going to that place that we call home. We might call the Father's house, heaven, oneness, but it's right here. It's right here in us, the place we call home. It's the oneness with all life. It is compassion. Joseph Campbell says, the whole purpose of our journey is compassion. Compassion. The Sufi mystic Hafez says, the wise man learn what draws God near. It is the beauty of the compassion in your heart. When we open ourselves to love one another, when we open ourselves to realize we're all part of this beautiful song of life, God's song, then we can see the angels are saying, yes, you got it. You're part of this song. I love it. We're part of this song of life. We each have a perfect place to play. Piece to play, note to play, something. But we have to do it beautifully. Now, wholeheartedly. I don't know, it evolves in its beauty, but we have to do it in our own way. Last week I said, when the indigenous people got together and they saw someone that was out of balance, they would say to them, when did you stop loving stories, especially your own? When did you stop loving stories, especially your own? I want us to be loving our stories. You want to love your story? Yes. Well, then just say, I am the light. I am vibrant. I am alive. I have lots to give. And I choose to do it. Now. Really now. Right now. And so it is. Let's pray. Woo! Let's pray. I'm going to invite the gratitude choir back up as we come together in a prayer that's focused on compassion, a prayer that opens us to a greater expression of our lives, where we can step out of the whininess, the complaining, all of the darkness that's gotten its hold on us, and just transform it, transmute it, and allow ourselves to be ignited by the light that's already within. That beautiful pull that pulls us to have the strength and the courage to fight the darkness, the demons, the whatever we call them, to know there's something more to be expressed and something so much more to live. We have a beautiful note to play in this song of life. We have a beautiful note to play as we come together and realize the uniqueness, the specialness of each and every person and being and thing on this planet. We allow ourselves to be the mystics that have that direct connection with God. We don't need the intermediaries. We just need to open ourselves up in the consciousness and the feeling of compassion and know that we have a part to play right here and right now. Can we imagine in this moment what life would be if we were all singing the one song of love, of peace, and of compassion? I would imagine in this moment that our gratitude choir does.